My stepdad tried to sabotage my future just because his own kid couldn't handle my success, so I removed myself from the situation entirely. Now they're back in the picture, and they were completely blindsided by what I did. I'm a 21-year-old guy, and honestly, I've been carrying this story around for way too long. It's time to let it out. I've kept this inside for years, but after everything that's happened recently, I need to speak my truth. Heads up, it's not a short tale. I'm also posting this from a backup account because some of the people involved follow my main one, and I really don't need that kind of drama right now. Before I can explain how everything unfolded, I need to take you back to where I came from. My dad? He was a straight-up rock star in the tech world. One of those late 1990s software engineers who hit the scene just as the tech boom exploded. He landed a job at one of the major players, think Facebook or Amazon level, but I'll keep the company name to myself for privacy reasons. But unlike the cliché Silicon Valley dads who bury themselves in code and forget they have families, my dad was nothing like that. I still remember one night in vivid detail. I must have been around 10. It was 8 p.m., and he had just gotten home after a brutal 10-hour shift fixing some high-stakes production issue. He looked like he could collapse any second, dead on his feet from exhaustion. Meanwhile, I was stuck on a piece of algebra homework that was due the next morning. He could have flopped onto the couch and no one would have blamed him, but instead, he sat down next to me, walked me through the problems, and even turned it into a cool little lesson about how algebra is kind of like programming with variables. That was just who he was. No matter how tired or busy, he always made time for me. He cared deeply about setting me up for success. We had this old, beat-up ThinkPad he rescued from his company's recycling pile, and every weekend, he'd teach me the basics of coding on it. I started with Scratch when I was about 9, then moved on to Python by the time I was 12. He used to build little coding games for me, like challenges that made learning fun. Looking back now, I realize he basically gave me a head start in computer science before I even hit middle school. We weren't swimming in money, but we lived pretty comfortably. A nice suburb outside of Northbridge, Massachusetts, good schools, safe streets, all that. My mom taught high school English, still does, actually, but I'll get to her later. Back then, we had this tight little trio thing going. Mom would be at the kitchen table grading essays, Dad would be showing me loops and logic on that old ThinkPad, and every Friday night we'd order pizza and watch a sci-fi movie, Star Wars, Star Trek, Blade Runner, the classics. And Dad wore his nerd status like a badge of honor. And then, everything fell apart. It started small. Dad began complaining about stomach aches. At first, he brushed them off, like a lot of guys tend to do. But Mom pushed him to see a doctor, and that's when the bomb dropped. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. If you know even a little about cancer, you'll know that's basically a death sentence. Doctors gave him 6 to 12 months. He made it to 6. But even with that kind of clock ticking above his head, he never stopped planning for the future. He'd already set up a college fund for me years before, but now he doubled down. Life insurance, a trust fund, legal documents, everything squared away with brutal precision. He even left me a letter I wasn't supposed to open until I got into college, a moment he sadly never got to see. Just thinking about that tightens my throat. One of the last real conversations we had was in the hospital. He could barely get the words out, but he grabbed my hand and made me promise 2 things: never stop learning and look out for Mom. I was just 13, trying my hardest not to cry while my whole world was crumbling. After he passed, things got dark. Mom took time off from work, and I buried myself in studying. It felt like, even if Dad wasn't around to teach me anymore, I could still honor his memory by learning everything I could. I dove into more advanced coding projects, got extra math tutoring after school, and joined every academic club I could find. I guess that was my way of dealing with the grief, staying busy, staying sharp. And weirdly, it worked. We managed okay for a few years. The life insurance let us stay in our home, and eventually, Mom returned to teaching. It was just the 2 of us, trying to figure out this new kind of normal. She'd help me polish my essays, and I'd show her how to navigate Google Classroom. Seriously, how are so many teachers still allergic to basic tech? It wasn't the same as before, but we made it work. Then came Todd, and that's when things really started going sideways. Mom met Todd about 2.5 years after Dad passed. Looking back, I can see every red flag lit up like Vegas at midnight. But at the time, I was just a confused 16-year-old kid trying to deal with some random guy suddenly stepping into our lives. They met through some local single-parent Facebook group. Yeah, I know, huge red flag already. Todd ran this sketchy used car dealership in town, One of those buy here, pay here places that prey on people with bad credit. He always bragged about being this self-made entrepreneur, but the whole operation screamed scam. Picture a place where the cars mysteriously lose mileage between test drives and the contracts are written in font so small it needs a magnifying glass. First time I met the guy, he pulled into our driveway in a leased BMW, which I later found out he was behind on payments for, rocking one of those fake Omega watches you can spot from across the street. But Mom? She was all in. She'd been lonely for a long time, teaching all day, then coming home to just me and my homework. Todd came barging into our lives with his whole smooth-talking businessman routine, flowers, fancy dinners, the whole fake fairy tale, and Mom fell for it hard. Classic love bombing. But at the time, I didn't have the life experience to see through it. And if that wasn't bad enough, he brought along his pride and joy, his son, Chad. Man, I don't even know where to begin with that guy. Picture every cocky, brainless jerk from a bad high school comedy mashed into one dude. Then subtract about 50 IQ points, and you've got Chad. He was technically 2 years older than me, but he'd already been held back twice. He strutted around in overpriced designer gear, stuff Todd probably bought using shady money from his car lot, and acted like he was some suburban kingpin. His Instagram bio? Future CEO. The only thing he ever led was a life of dodging responsibility. Todd moved into our house barely 8 months after he and Mom started dating. 8 months. And suddenly we were all playing house like some knockoff Brady Bunch. Chad took the guest room, right next to mine, and that's when my personal hell really began. This guy would blast his trash SoundCloud rap at ungodly hours, like 2 a.m. when I was trying to study. He had zero sense of boundaries. I caught him going through my stuff more than once. But the moment that almost broke me? The day I saw him strutting around in one of my dad's old MIT hoodies. I nearly lost it. And somehow, that still wasn't the worst of it. His behavior around any girl I brought over was downright predatory. Case in point, Emily, not her real name, came over once to work on a coding project. Chad hovered the whole time, throwing out sleazy comments and being a general creep. Later, I found out he started spreading lies about her at school. After that, I stopped inviting people over altogether. It just wasn't worth the drama. Todd, for his part, wasn't any better. He tried playing the wise stepdad role, always leading with this fake fatherly tone like, "Now, son." Yeah, no. I shut that down real quick. I told him flat out, I already had a dad, and he sure as hell wasn't him. His favorite rant was how college was a scam and how I should learn real business from him instead. Right. Because mastering the art of running a failing, predatory dealership is apparently the new MBA. But what really crushed me was watching my mom change. She used to be strong, independent, the kind of teacher who introduced her students to feminist writers and encouraged them to think critically and speak up. But with Todd around, she became someone I barely recognized. She'd laugh at his cringy jokes, excuse every shady thing Chad did, and bend over backward trying to win Todd's approval. It broke my heart. I tried talking to her. I showed her BBB complaints about Todd's dealership. I told her about Chad's behavior, how invasive and inappropriate he was. You know what she said? They deserve a chance. Todd's had a rough life, and Chad just needs a mother's touch. Seriously? What about me? I'd lost my dad, and now I was stuck living with some knockoff wolf of Wall Street and his creepy, wannabe entrepreneur son? The vibe at home shifted fast. Todd and Chad basically took over the living room, always rambling about hustling and grinding, their two favorite buzzwords, as they plotted out some half-baked get-rich-quick scheme. Meanwhile, I was upstairs, actually grinding, studying my ass off, coding, trying to keep my GPA perfect. The contrast was almost comedic, if it hadn't been my actual life. Then Todd started poking around where he didn't belong. About a month after moving in, he began asking Mom about her finances, her savings, my college fund, all of it. He had this slick little pitch about investing it into the business and promising to triple our returns. Classic con artist nonsense. Thank God my dad had the foresight to lock away my college money in a trust. If he hadn't, Todd would have burned through it in a week, right alongside the last of my faith in humanity. And then, as if that weren't enough, I started noticing something else. Mom was slowly removing everything that reminded us of Dad. His books vanished from the shelves. The old MIT hoodie she used to wear on lazy weekends? Gone. It felt like she was systematically erasing every trace of our past to make room for this new circus of a family. I should have seen what was coming. The calculating way Todd looked whenever we talked about my future, the little passive-aggressive jabs Chad threw whenever I aced a test. They weren't just annoying. They were laying the groundwork for something worse. While those two were busy turning our house into a low-budget reality show, I was on a mission of my own. Looking back, I probably went overboard. But when you're chasing a dream in a toxic environment, you cling to whatever keeps you sane. For me, that meant pushing myself to the limit with school. I'd get up at 5 a.m. every day just to avoid running into Todd and Chad in the kitchen. Nothing ruins breakfast like watching Chad shovel Lucky Charms into his mouth while bragging about some sketchy dropshipping hustle he found on TikTok. School started at 8 o'clock, but I'd show up by 7 o'clock just to use the computer lab. The school's tech was ancient, but even those crusty machines were better than trying to work at home, where Chad would barge in with zero awareness. Those early mornings became my peace. Mr. Rodriguez, the janitor, would always let me in early, shout out to that guy. Sometimes he even brought me coffee if he saw me deep in some brutal debugging session. My course load? Academic suicide. AP Comp Sci, AP Calc BC, AP Physics C, AP Lang. If it had AP in front of it, I was in it. Even the guidance counselor told me I was overdoing it, said the pressure might be too much. But compared to Todd's lectures on how book smarts don't mean anything, school felt like a sanctuary. The real challenge? Balancing all that with prepping for the SAT. I didn't have the luxury of those pricey SAT prep classes all the rich kids at school were signing up for, so I practically moved into the public library. They had a stash of old SAT books from like 2015, outdated, sure, but math formulas don't change much. I'd camp out there until the lights shut off, mostly because I didn't want to go home. Mrs. Alvarez, the librarian, would sometimes forget to make the closing announcement when she saw how deep I was into a practice section. Shout out to people like her quiet heroes who see more than they say and do what they can to help without making it a big deal. My scores were okay at first, nothing to brag about. I pulled a 1340 on my first practice test. Not terrible, but definitely not Ivy League material. So I kicked it into overdrive. My weekends turned into marathon test sessions. I'd take full-length practice exams, break down every mistake like a game film, and build flashcard stacks the size of cereal boxes for every vocab word I didn't know cold. By the time I took the actual SAT, I walked out with a 1550. When I got the results, I locked myself in the school bathroom and just cried. 20 straight minutes of full-on, ugly sobbing. Meanwhile, Chad kept doing his usual thing, calling me a tryhard, accusing me of sucking up to teachers. Honestly, I think it burned him to see someone actually working for something. I stopped caring. Every insult just made me picture my dad's MIT graduation photo hanging on my wall, and that image kept me going. And man, the extracurriculars? I stacked them like my life depended on it, because, in a way, it did. I led the coding club, captained the debate team by junior year, volunteered at a tech literacy class for seniors, teaching older folks how to avoid internet scams, which, ironically, taught me a lot just from watching Todd's shady business tactics, and worked part-time at a computer repair shop to help cover expenses. Mom did what she could. She'd leave reheated dinners in the microwave on nights I got home late from all the activities. Every now and then, she'd ask about college, genuinely curious, but Todd would always butt in with some recycled story about a millionaire who made it without college. Watching him slowly take over her voice, it stung. She was fading into someone I barely recognized. What hit me hardest was that I was fighting tooth and nail to build a future, and Chad was doing absolutely nothing. Literally nothing. He dropped out of community college after 3 weeks, blamed it on haters who didn't respect his business mindset, and spent his time either sleeping or helping at Todd's greasy dealership. Helping with what, exactly? Turning busted cars into rolling lies? What kept me sane were those early mornings in the computer lab. That peaceful silence before the noise of the day. Just me, a blank terminal, and a couple hours of clean coding. It almost felt like my dad was there beside me, watching, nodding, proud. Every line of code that compiled clean, every test I aced, every math proof I solved, it was part of my escape plan. Then came college application season, and with it, a whole new kind of stress. The day that changed everything? March 30th, 2022. I'll never forget it. It was a Wednesday, just after 6:30 in the evening. I was at my usual spot in the library, pretending to focus on AP Physics homework, but really just hammering that refresh button on my inbox. Ivy day. My stomach felt like it was doing flips inside a cement mixer. I'd applied to 9 schools, for safeties, already accepted, 3 targets, 2 yeses, and 2 dreams. I won't say which ones, but let's just say they're places where the acceptance rate is smaller than Chad's GPA. Their computer science department? Top 5 in the country. Graduates don't look for jobs, companies compete for them. So there I was, practically vibrating with nerves, when the email finally hit. Update on your application status. My hands were shaking so badly, I misclicked twice trying to open it. And then, I saw it. One word that changed everything: congratulations. At first, I didn't believe it. Read it 5, 6 times. Just sat there, stunned. Mrs. Alvarez must have thought I was having a full-blown meltdown, because I didn't move for a solid minute. Then the dam broke. Not gentle crying, we're talking full body, can't breathe sobbing in the middle of the reference section. She rushed over, concerned, and when I showed her the email, her whole face lit up. She pulled me into a big, warm hug, then got teary-eyed herself. Told me she always knew I was going places. Joked that when I win a Nobel Prize someday, she's going to frame the headline. No pressure, right? First person I called? Mom. She was still at school grading papers. When I told her, she let out a scream so loud I had to yank the phone away from my ear. She said she was coming straight home to celebrate. And for one perfect moment, it felt like the old days again. Like when I won the state science fair in middle school and Dad took us out for ice cream to celebrate. I got home around 8 o'clock, and she was already there. She grabbed a cheap bottle of champagne and was literally dancing around the kitchen. She hugged me over and over, saying Dad would have been so proud. And for those few minutes, everything felt right. But it didn't last. Todd and Chad rolled in around 8 o'clock, probably fresh off another day of trying to flip junkyard clunkers into barely driven gems. Mom was still mid-dance when the front door opened, and I swear, the second they walked in, the whole mood collapsed. The air went cold, like someone had opened a freezer right in the middle of our celebration. Todd had this thing he did. He'd try to look all serious and thoughtful, but it always came off like he was fighting off a bad case of constipation. Instead of saying congrats or even cracking a smile, he jumped straight into interrogation mode. When did I apply? How much was tuition? Just a barrage of irrelevant questions that screamed one thing: deflection. Thinking I could shut it down fast, I mentioned my dad's college fund, figured that'd be the end of it. Yeah, big mistake. As soon as I said it, something in his face twitched, like I just confirmed a suspicion he'd been quietly stewing over for months. He glanced at Mom and muttered, "Oh, that money," with this loaded tone that made it crystal clear he'd been scheming around it for a while. Then he hit me with this whole speech about how I should have looped them in before applying. Like I needed their permission to chase my future. And of course, Chad had to chime in, because God forbid Todd monologue solo. He went on about how I was rubbing my success in people's faces, meaning him, obviously. The same guy who dropped out of community college after 3 weeks because the professors didn't respect his grind, and once begged Todd to buy him a Tesla so he could elevate his personal brand. You can't make this stuff up. But the real gut punch came later that night. After midnight, there was a knock at my door. Mom, looking like she'd been crying for hours. She hit me with the dreaded, "We need to talk." Nothing good ever follows those 4 words. That's when she laid it all out. Todd had cooked up this whole plan to use my college fund to expand the dealership. He even made a PowerPoint presentation to pitch it. I wish I were exaggerating. Apparently, Mom had been stalling him, saying they should wait until I got accepted somewhere before making any decisions. Well, now I had an offer in hand, and Todd was pressing hard. No subtlety, no shame. He gave her an ultimatum: either convince me to support this brilliant investment idea, or things in their marriage would get rocky. And there was Mom, eyes red, voice shaking, asking me to think about the family. What family? The one where my stepfather was actively plotting to hijack the only real gift my dad left me? The one where my wannabe influencer stepbrother filmed TikToks about hustle culture while doing absolutely nothing? That family? I didn't say a word. I just handed her the letter Dad wrote me, the one he left behind for the day I got into college. In it, he wrote how proud he was, how he believed I would do incredible things, and how he'd made sure I could pursue my dreams without drowning in debt. Mom read it and cried even harder, but even then, she asked if we could find some common ground. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about college anymore. It was about a choice: honor my father's legacy or cave to the twisted version of family Todd was trying to sell us. It was me versus the circus. And what happened the next morning? Honestly, it made Game of Thrones family drama look tame. I came downstairs, and there was Todd, parked at the kitchen table like he was hosting a corporate board meeting. In front of him, a tidy stack of documents. Mom sat across from him, pale and hollow-eyed, clutching an old MIT coffee mug, the one Dad had bought her years ago on campus. The sight of it twisted my stomach. And then Todd hit play on an actual PowerPoint slideshow. I wish I were joking. The title? Family Financial Planning, a Strategic Path to Shared Prosperity. The man was in full Wolf of Wall Street cosplay. The slides were packed with cheesy stock photos, magical growth curves, and enough corporate buzzwords: synergy, scalability, leveraging untapped potential to make a LinkedIn recruiter blush. What the presentation didn't include: any actual numbers, credible research, or legal structure. The big idea? Use my college fund to buy a second used car dealership, this one already circling the drain. Because apparently, when one scam is failing, the logical move is to double down and fail twice as fast. I sat there for 30 minutes, watching this train wreck of a pitch, every slide feeling like a slap to my father's face. But what hurt most? Watching Mom nod along, throwing in things like, Todd really understands the market, and this could be a good opportunity for everyone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Then came the final blow. Todd leaned back, all smug, and said, "So, Sport, how do you feel about taking a gap year?" That's what he called me when he was trying to be buddy-buddy. Sport. Let the business grow a little, then we can revisit the whole college thing. That was it. I snapped. I told him exactly what I thought of his business genius. I pulled out receipts, literally. I'd already looked up his BBB rating, a rock-solid D-. I brought up the odometer tampering complaints, the lawsuits, the fact that his dealership was 2 months behind on rent. Thank God I'd taken that business law elective. Todd's face morphed from smug confidence to boiling rage. Chad, who'd been eavesdropping from the doorway like a bargain bin security guard, puffed up like he was going to do something. But I wasn't done. I pulled out my phone and opened the email I'd received from my dad's attorney the night before. Yeah, I'd reached out right after Mom's tearful midnight visit. I wasn't about to walk into this ambush unarmed. The lawyer confirmed it all. The trust was airtight, legally sealed, ironclad. Todd had zero authority to touch a cent of it. And if he or Mom tried to manipulate me into signing over access, it could legally count as coercion, maybe even fraud. And that's when the situation exploded. Todd did what he always does when he's cornered, put on that fake, pained expression that looked more like he was passing a kidney stone than showing concern. And instead of saying anything remotely supportive, he went off on a rant about how I was the one tearing the family apart with my selfishness. Yeah, wild, coming from a man trying to swipe a dead father's college fund from his kid. Right on cue, Chad jumped in, flinging insults like it was open mic night at the local jerk convention. And Mom? She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, barely whispering anything beyond, "We just need to find a middle ground." I looked at her and said something I'll probably carry with me for the rest of my life. "Mom, what do you think Dad would say if he saw you right now?" The room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. And then Todd made his final move. He turned to Mom and said, "It's time to choose. Either your son becomes a team player, or—" He didn't even need to finish the sentence. The threat was loud and clear, hanging in the air like smoke. Mom stood up slowly. For a moment, I hoped she was finally going to call him out. I held my breath. But then she looked at me with this exhausted, hollow expression and said, "Maybe we could look at some schools closer to home. Something more affordable." And just like that, I knew. Everything had changed. Not just my dream of attending my dad's university, but my relationship with my mother. She'd made her choice. And it wasn't me. She chose the illusion of stability Todd was offering. She chose him. I went upstairs and quietly began to pack, not everything, just the essentials. I wasn't stupid enough to make it obvious I was leaving for good. I grabbed my laptop, a couple of changes of clothes, my dad's old MIT hoodie, and every single important document I'd carefully organized for this exact type of situation: birth certificate, social security card, bank records. I wasn't walking into this blind. Then I called Ben, my best friend since middle school. His parents had treated me like family for years. As soon as I told him what was going on, he didn't even hesitate. His dad, a retired Marine who knew a thing or two about toxic homes, just said, "Grab your things, son. You've got a room here." The next few days were a whirlwind: lawyers, paperwork, meetings at the bank. I moved quickly. I had to. Mom kept calling, cycling through emotional blackmail and false promises. How could you do this to me? We're still a family. We can fix this. Todd bounced between smug threats and awkward charm, like he couldn't decide whether to scare me or sweet-talk me. And Chad? He just glared at me like a toddler realizing someone had taken away his favorite toy. Deep down, I think he knew his meal ticket was walking out the door. But through the noise, through the tears and shouting and cold silences, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. This wasn't about tuition money anymore. It was about taking back control of my future. About protecting my father's legacy. About finally standing up for myself. When the day came to leave for good, I stood in the front hallway one last time. Mom was there, crying, begging me not to go. Todd stood behind her, pretending to care, probably already rehearsing how to spin the story for the neighbors. I looked my mother in the eyes and said, "Dad would be ashamed." Then I turned around and walked out the door. You ever watch those feel-good movies where the main character gets into their dream school and everything magically falls into place? Yeah, real life doesn't work like that. The first few months were hard. Moving into my dorm felt strange. Most kids had their families helping them carry boxes, taking pictures, hugging them goodbye. Me? I had Ben and his parents. And while I'll always be thankful for them, watching all those other families made something in my chest ache. Mom texted me, asking if she could help move me in. I never responded. Left her on read. That semester, I met Emily. Not the Emily from high school, a different one. We met in linear algebra. She was brilliant, the kind of person who could explain abstract math like she was teaching it to a group of kindergartners. We started dating in second semester, and somewhere along the line, I told her everything. About Mom. About Todd. About Chad. The whole tangled mess. She didn't say much. Just listened. And when I finally ran out of words, she helped me finish debugging a sorting algorithm at 3 a.m. Because she knew that's what I needed to keep my mind from spiraling. But the past has a way of clinging to you. Mom kept reaching out. Birthday cards. Holiday messages. Random check-ins. Most of them I ignored. A few I answered with short, cold replies. I'm fine. Thanks. Each message felt like reopening a wound that hadn't fully closed. Then came internship season. Landing a tech internship at a FANG company? That's like threading a needle blindfolded while juggling flaming swords. But somehow, I did it. I got the offer during algorithms class. The salary? More than Todd probably made in an entire quarter trying to sell rusted Hondas to desperate families. Word eventually got back to me. Ben's mom heard it through the grapevine. Todd's dealership had finally collapsed. Apparently, he tried some sketchy financing stunt, and it backfired spectacularly. Chad? Last I heard, he was working at a vape shop, still calling himself a future entrepreneur. Mom was still teaching, but things between her and Todd? Rocky at best. No surprise there. The internship itself? Unreal. I spent the summer building real products that people actually use. My team lead was a senior engineer who reminded me of my dad. Same mentoring spirit. Same awful dad jokes. On my last day, he pulled me aside and said, "You've got something special. If you're interested, we'd love to bring you back after graduation." He handed me a return offer. The kind of compensation package that made my hands shake just reading it. That night, I got a text from my mom congratulating me on the job offer. Turns out my project manager had some connection in the teaching world and mentioned how well I'd been doing. She said she wanted to see me, to finally talk things through, to make things right. She told me there were things she needed to say. Things she should have said a long time ago. I just stared at that message for hours, torn. A big part of me wanted to delete it like all the others. But then I thought of that little kid who used to sit beside her at the kitchen table, helping her grade papers, showing her how to use Google Classroom. That kid? He just wanted his mom back. Eventually, I replied, "Fine, but we meet on my terms." Her reply came almost instantly. "Anything you want. I just want to see you." Funny how life loops back around. 5 years after walking away from that house with nothing but a backpack, a dream, and a fire in my chest, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe near my apartment, waiting for the woman who once asked me to trade my future for Todd's scams. I picked the place carefully, neutral territory. Public enough to stay civil, private enough for real conversation. Also, their iced coffee didn't suck. Emily had offered to wait nearby just in case things went sideways, but I told her this was something I had to do alone. When Mom walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, older, like life had chipped away at her piece by piece. The confident teacher I once knew was gone. This woman looked like she'd been through a war. But the thing that hit hardest? She was wearing Dad's old MIT sweatshirt. The one I thought Todd had thrown away. The first few minutes were painfully awkward. Small talk, weather, work, safe topics, each of us skirting the edges of everything we'd left unsaid. Then she took a deep breath and dropped it. Todd left me. I didn't act surprised. Ben's mom had kept me updated on the neighborhood gossip. After the dealership went under, Todd had tried to reinvent himself as a crypto guru. Of course he had. When that crashed, he bailed, left Mom with nothing but debt and heartbreak. But what came next shook me. He never planned to invest her college fund, she said, eyes fixed on her coffee. He wanted to use it to pay off his gambling debts. Turns out the dealership was just smoke and mirrors. Todd had been borrowing money from dangerous people, and the walls were closing in. Suddenly, all the desperation around the trust fund made sense. He wasn't just a scammer, he was running for his life. Then Mom broke down. Not like before, not crocodile tears meant to manipulate. This time it was real. Raw. She told me everything. How Todd had threatened her when she refused to sign over my trust. How he funneled dealership funds to cover his losses. How even Chad got tangled up in shady deals behind that grimy garage. I was scared, she said. Not just of him, but of being alone after your father died. I thought I'd never find someone again. Todd seemed capable. At first. By the time she realized who he truly was, she said, it was already too late. But none of that, she admitted, excused what she let happen. I sat there in silence. A part of me still wanted to be angry, to remind her that she chose him. Repeatedly. But across the table, I saw someone grieving, just like I had been. Someone who had lost herself, too. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I found this going through Todd's stuff, she said. It was a letter. From Dad. Dated a week before he passed. Written to her. In it, he asked her to protect me. To make sure I had every opportunity he'd worked so hard to provide. I never showed it to Todd, she said softly. I failed him. And I failed you. That's when I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached across the table and took her hand. You didn't fail, I said. You're here now. And just like that, something shifted. We talked for hours. Not surface-level fluff, the real stuff. She told me about going to therapy. About trying to rebuild. I told her about college. About Emily. About the offer letter still pinned to my desk. It was the first time since Dad's funeral that it felt like we were really seeing each other again. Eventually, I asked her the question that had haunted me for years. Why didn't you fight for me when I left? She squeezed my hand and said, because you reminded me so much of your father. He never backed down from what was right, even when it hurt. And when you stood up to Todd, I saw him in you. I knew you'd be okay. But you weren't, I said. No, she admitted. But I am now. And if you'll let me. I'd like to be part of your life again. That's when I told her my news. I just closed on a small house near the company I'd be joining full-time. Nothing fancy. But it had an extra bedroom. It's yours, I said. If you want it. Fresh start. She cried again. This time, happy tears. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me something unexpected. She'd been taking online coding courses. Figured it was time I learned what all the fuss was about, she said with a shy smile. Maybe you could tutor me? Something clicked in that moment. Not a return to the past. We'd lost too much for that. But the beginning of something new. Something real. She moved in last month. She teaches at a nearby school now, and in the evenings, I help her with her Python assignments. Sometimes we stay up late working, her grading essays, me debugging code, and for a few moments, it feels like those quiet nights from years ago. Last week, she hung Dad's MIT graduation photo in her room. Right next to it, my college acceptance letter. It's a reminder, she told me, of what happens when you believe in yourself. As for Todd and Chad, last I heard, they were down in Bay Cliff, Florida, pushing some sketchy NFT scam to whoever's still foolish enough to listen. Good riddance. Emily still says I'm a little crazy for letting my mom back into my life. Maybe I am. But sometimes, life isn't about perfect solutions. It's about working through the bugs, patching what you can, and learning to rebuild, line by line. That's what we're doing. And for the first time in a long time, it finally feels like the program is running right.